Many years and many pounds ago, I was in a wonderful little place called Paris Island, South Carolina. And for those of you that are uninformed, that's the kind of a little summer camp type place that they send those of us that are foolish enough to raise our right hands and say, I want to be a United States Marine. But when I got there, I could tell you immediately I was loved. I mean, I got a lot of attention right away. You never forget your senior drill instructor. Now, at my age, I've got 8 grandkids. I have them wear name tags. But you never forget the name of your senior drill instructor. I'll never forget Staff Sergeant Lena. Now, Staff Sergeant Lena was the only guy on the planet, other than my father-in-law, who could actually make my name sound like a curse word. And I'll never forget one day we were out training in the swamps of South Carolina, and in the old days when I was in, you had solid green uniforms, and it's important to know that in the Marine Corps, they call your underwear skivvies, okay? So keep that in mind. We'd been out in the swamp all day, even to a point that salt was gathered up and had white deposits, all over the uniforms. And so at the end of the day, Lena comes in and he says, maggots, that's a common term of endearment in the Marine Corps. He said, I've got some good news and some bad news. He said, the bad news is, you're not going to get any showers today. He said, the good news is you will get a change of skivvies. Blanton, you change with Peterson, you change with Mason. The reason I tell that somewhat embellished story is this, is sometimes change that we think is good turns out to be bad. And sometimes change that we think is going to be bad turns out to be good. But one thing that will never change is going to be the need to be able to lead in high-speed, high-stress chaos. They now, if you Google the term VUCA, you'll get hundreds of thousands of returns out there. It's a military term that came from the Army War College, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the world that we live in now. And just a housekeeping issue here, guys, I've already done the PDFs on this, and so if you ask Margot or however she communicates, every one of these slides will come to you afterwards, so you don't have to worry about trying to write down what's on the slides. But this is where we're at, and then it's been compounded with what Tom Friedman said. He said, you need to get a new clicker. He said, we are no longer in a world where the big eat the small, but where the fast eat the slow. So now you have all this high-speed, high-stress chaos going on, and it is indeed multiplied by the speed. I'm going to read this to you. It's a little bit lengthy, but it really lays the groundwork for world we're in business today. Ram Charan is a Harvard Business School guy. He is a consultant to top companies around the world. He's been around a long time and has ridden out a lot of cycles. And so this is not some new age writer that's just now waking up to the new universe there. He's been around a while. Here's what he says. He says, the immense uncertainty I see in today's business leaders facing is something truly unique in its scale, in its speed, the ferocity of its impact, and increasing ubiquity. It is qualitatively different by orders of magnitude from anything that has ever gone on before. He said, what's new is structural uncertainty. It's structural because the forces now at work can explode the existing structure of your market space and your industry, putting it at risk of being drastically diminished or completely eliminated. Finally, every uncertainty is magnified by quantum increases in the speed of changes, largely brought about by the revolutions in computer and communications technology. So here's what he says. He says that these forces are long-term and they're irresistible. And he said, for those of us that are unprepared for these massive changes, they're going to bring to us what he calls sudden bends in the road that appear seemingly without warning to obscure whatever future you envision for your business. So he says, steering your business through structural uncertainty will call for a distinctly different type of leadership than the one you were trained for and are likely currently exercising, requiring a radically different mindset and new skill sets for anticipating events on the attack. And here's how he sums it up. He said, the advantage now goes to those who create change, not those who learn to live with it. So that's the environment that we're in right now. And so as leaders, the first thing we've got to do is understand and accept the environment that we're in. But the last time that I checked, even though these things can be kind of scary, the last time I checked, Christ was still on the throne. He's still in charge. And I love this kind of response. General Mattis, who is now the Secretary of Defense, I love this attitude, and this is the attitude that Christians must have. In an interview there, the interview said, what keeps you awake at night? He says, nothing. I keep other people awake at night. And so that's the attitude that we want to have. Is that biblical? Yes, it's biblical. We see there that David ran quickly toward the lion to meet the Philistine. And so tonight, just for these next 3.5 hours, I want us to cover here the principles of leading in this type of environment. And so the organization that I'm going to make the argument for, that's already been down this road, that knows how to lead in high-speed, high-stress chaos, is the United States Marine Corps. But before I get into that, I always have to, because there's some preconceived ideas, and I'm going to have to make a case for the Marine Corps. Since 1775, the United States Marine Corps has been doing two things. They've been making Marines and winning battles. Folks, if you're running a business or you're leading a business in a division here, there's a whole lot in this mission statement. We've seen, I've worked with a company in the past that I ran, where we had processed and helped over 4,000 businesses get SBA loans. And you would see every kind of business plan on the planet. And their mission statement would always have something about, we're going to be the biggest, the baddest, the best. And you've seen these, if we get 1/10 to 1% of the market, we're all going to be trillionaires. You've seen that. But I've never seen one that had in their actual mission statement, we're going to make the people, we're going to develop the people that are going to win this battle. And so that's the first step. You have seen this in action. Even though I served many years ago, I had the great privilege in 2005, and then again, I loved it so much, I went back in 2007. I embedded with these young Marines of today in wonderful little outhouses like Fallujah, and this one is in Ramadi. And I want you to think about this just for a moment. I'd go out on patrols there, and like with this young guy here, 20 years old, 20-year-old sergeant. A couple of years prior, this young guy, mama couldn't get him out of bed. Come from a hip-hop culture, trousers hanging off his rear end. Yeah, no respect, anything. Here we have a little over 2 years later, about 2.5 years later, this young guy is leading a patrol of Marines in Ramadi, and this was taken in 2005. And actually, in this photo, about a minute and a half after this picture, they dropped two 82 millimeter mortars right in on top of us, and the young guy that you see just going out of the picture there was wounded in the process. But I want you to picture these guys. They're going through this hostile city, and one block they're doing humanitarian aid. They're setting up, and they've got a young Navy corpsman, and he's performing medical procedures that you'd have to have a doctor's license here in the United States to do. And so they're winning hearts and minds through peacekeeping. The next block, in what the Marines call a 3-block war, he's having to act as policeman. Again, this kid's 20 years old, got the lives of 12 Marines and another corpsman. He's walking through here, and one of the things that the Iraqis love to do there for kicks and grins was that if you stole my girlfriend, then I would go to the Marines walking by, if I'm an Iraqi, and I would tell them that you are Al-Qaeda. So this 20-year-old kid's got to make a decision on the spot. Do I roll this guy up, put his face in the dirt, absolutely make an enemy of him and his family, or do I take the chance of letting him go and find out later on after I've lost some guys that this guy's a bomb maker? In the next block, they're facing what the media sometimes calls a low-intensity firefight. And I can tell you from experience being over there in 05 and 07, if you've ever had lead coming your way with your name on it, there's nothing low-intense about it. But these young guys have to switch gears from Peace Corps worker to policeman to warrior, and they have to do that in a split second. And guess what? They don't have time to call back to the company office and get permission from the vice president of operations to make that decision. And so on top of that chaos, I want you to think about young people that you know, some of the youngest in your organization have to make decisions that critical. And then just for kicks and grins, they're going to be followed around by CNN cameras who's trying to catch them screw up and putting them on international television. So that's the case. If you think that I'm prejudiced, most people, when they think of the Marine Corps, this is what they think of. How many of y'all have seen Full Metal Jacket? Okay, and so that's only partly true. There's some of it there, and but everybody thinks that that's the model of leadership. The bottom line is, you can't scream a young guy to face death. You can't scream at a young guy loud enough to make that happen. So yes, this happens during boot camp where they're breaking us down and building us back up. But the model of leadership I'm going to show you is quite different than probably what your perception is. There's been a study that was published in Harvard Business Review. McKinsey & Company is one of the top management consulting firms in the world. And they studied 50 companies in the world that were known for their leadership development. And you'll recognize some of the names: Marriott, Home Depot, KFC, Ritz-Carlton, and Southwest Airlines were just to name a few. Two of the guys on the McKinsey team were old Marines, and they said, well, why don't you take a look at the way the Marines do it? They said, well, you guys just break things and kill people. What does that have to do with our world? They were pretty persistent, as us Marines tend to be. They studied the Marines, and here's what they concluded. They concluded that the Corps outperformed all other organizations when it came to engaging the hearts and the minds of the front line. Wharton Business School, no better preparation for the rigors of running a business than the intense training of the Marine Corps. I'm just going to flip through these. Wall Street Journal, all these guys are giving us walk on water endorsements, just one right after another, and you'll have a chance to read these slides. But here's one I do want to share with you that you may not know. This little company that you see running around, it's got these little vans with this FedEx on the side. What you may not know is that Fred Smith is an old Marine. And here's what he said. He said, the Marine Corps has developed the finest leadership training in the world. The leadership principles taught by Marines are universally applicable and are the bedrock of the FedEx management system. And so that's the kudos from out there in the world, and these are just a few of my clients that I've had over the years where we come in and teach them this model of leadership that I'm sharing with you today. The Marines have a Center for Lessons Learned, and what they say is that in every engagement that goes on, they document that in an after-action report. And so they share that in a form of lessons learned, and it says so that the learning curve of the entire organization is elevated. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. The first lesson that I want to share with you very quickly, in the opening line there, the Marines leadership there, it says leadership is the dominating requirement for success. I talked to one of the gentlemen out here that works with, or let me go to this first. My first company, guys, I built broadcast towers to 2,000 feet in the air. And so here's how it would work. We'd build these things out in rural areas. And so usually at about the 500 foot, here would come all the locals. And they'd come out there in the evening after they get off work, and they'd back up their pickup trucks and get their lawn chairs and their beer coolers and start looking at us and our guys up working on the tower. through binoculars, or many times through their deer rifles, which was a little disconcerting because the fact was our guys had been in town with their girls the night before. But anyway, as we went through this process, we'd normally get to the 1,000-foot level, and then here would come some little reporter, little reporterette, and they'd want to get footage of the tower. We'd take them up 1,000 feet, start to take them up. They'd get 100 feet off the ground. They'd puke. We'd take them back down, take the footage ourselves. But in all those years, I never had anybody come out and say, I want to get some shots of that foundation. I want to see down there where the mud is and where the rocks are and where all the dirt is. But did you know when you're building a stick to 2,000 feet in the air, if that thing's off 1/8 of an inch at the ground floor, if your foundation's not right, guys, if your foundation is not in Christ, when that thing is at 2,000 feet, it'll lean over at least 8 feet. And as soon as the ice comes, as soon as the wind comes, you'll be wearing a 2,000-foot stick. So that's what I want to share with you. John Maxwell, in his great book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, he said this: if any organization has a potential to be a 10, but he calls what he calls the law of the lid. And he says if the leadership ability in that organization is only a 5, then that will hit what he calls the lid. The whole organization will never rise above the level of a 5. So the Marines define leadership this way, and it might be kind of interesting. Listen to the verbiage here. It says, the art of influencing and directing Marines in such a way as to obtain their willing obedience, confidence, and respect, loyal cooperation in order to accomplish the mission. So you think about that: willing obedience, respect, loyal cooperation, and that's making the Marines and then winning the battles. The essence of decision, if you think about it, what is leadership? Well, we are ultimately, good, bad, or ugly, we're where we are in a leadership role because of the decisions we've made, of how well or not we've communicated those decisions, and then ultimately how well those decisions are executed. A poor decision, regardless of how well communicated or how well executed, will result in failure. A great decision, poorly communicated, will be poorly executed. And you can actually have a great decision, communication great, and still not execute. So it takes all three. And so in the process there of making decisions, General Krulak, former commandant of the Marine Corps, said history has repeatedly demonstrated that battles have been lost more often by a leader's failure to make a decision than making a poor one. I see monuments to this to where I live up and down the road, cause of death, indecision. And I see that amongst business owners all the time. Wade knows our good old Willie boy there. This guy, I'll tell you, if you had 2 of these water bottles right beside each other and said, Willie boy, pick out one of those 2, there would be drops of blood coming out. I mean, there would be sweat. There would be, because he's going to weigh it, and this one's got a little bit of a wrinkle on there. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so time and time again, when decision making had to be done, the time to make that decision had already been done. And so in that communications piece, what the Marines shoot for is implicit communications. Implicit communications are the mutual understanding that require little or no talking or writing. When you've got a good team and it's communicating well, you'll be like my wife. You'll be like a old husband and wife team where you finish each other's sentences because you know what they're going to say. That's intuitive or implicit communication. And then finally, fighting power is an organization's ability to execute and overcome challenges, and it remains the ultimate measure of leadership. So here is how Marines define it, or the leadership relationship. They say that the relationship between the leader and the led should in no sense be that of superior or inferior, nor that of master and servant, but that of teacher and scholar. So that's my question to you in this high-speed, high-stress chaos. Is your leadership model include being a teacher? And so in the hierarchy of learning, they've shown that statistically, when you walk out of here within just a couple of hours, you're going to retain approximately 5% of what I've just told you. And yet that's how we deliver most of our training. At the maximum retention is teaching. When you learn a topic well enough to be able to teach it, that's where you learn. So I challenge you, there's the buzzword out there in the marketplace about learning organizations, but I challenge you to have a teaching organization where you have people that are equipped to teach others to lead. So the Bible tells us, cautions us that not many of you should become teachers, and that lets you know the exclusive role of leadership. The next thing we need to do is teach decision making. Let me ask you this. How many of you actually have ever had, that's the fundamental thing we do, I'm always curious, have actually ever had any formal training on decision making? Can I see your hand? Okay. I got an Army Ranger here and a couple of jarheads over here. But anybody else, I mean, seriously, very few do. Very few is there that much training, and it's at the essence of what we do. And so what I want to share with you is what that looks like. The Bible tells us in Exodus 28:15, fashion a breastplate for making decisions. And so in that, I want to share with you, this is the Marine Corps' decision-making model. Wait, I hate it when I have to stop, explain here, but that's the Marine Corps' model. But here's what I want to share with you, a model that you can take away from here and use. And it works in your marriage, it works if you're leading your kids, it works in whatever you're doing. Colonel John Boyd was the greatest fighter pilot this country ever produced, who nobody's ever heard of. John Boyd fought in the Korean War, and after that became the lead instructor at the Air Force's version of Top Gun School. And they called this guy 42nd Boyd, and the reason they called him 42nd Boyd was this. He had a standing bet with any of his fellow fighter pilots that came through from the Marine Corps, from the Navy, from all the NATO countries that came through this training center. He would allow them to get behind him in the kill position, and his bet for $40, which was a lot of money back in the early 60s, was that he would roll out of that and in a simulated dogfight shoot down his opponent under 40 seconds. In over 3,000 flight hours, John Boyd never lost. He was not only a brilliant fighter pilot and physically good at handling that aircraft, but he was an intellect. And so he was actually behind the scenes architect. So he retired as an Air Force colonel. The Air Force hated him. He was a maverick. They actually brought him up on charges one time because he stole $1 million worth of computing time. And so just a maverick. So what does an old washed-up Air Force guy do when he retires? The Marines hire him. And so he goes to work for the Marine, and he's developed this concept called the OODA loop, which is a decision-making model that I want to leave you with here. Here's how it works. In any environment that we have out here, we're in the process, we observe what's going on around us, okay? We observe it. Then it passes through our orientation. Now, I'm going to come back to orientation. Our orientation is our genetic heritage, new information, previous experience, how we analyze, synthesize, and then our cultural traditions. Out of that, we spit out a decision, okay? And then we take an action. Here's how it looks. First, we observe. Then it passes through in the observation piece. Here's what we're supposed to be doing as leaders during the observation. In Confronting Reality, again by Ram Charan and his partner Larry Bosti, he said the fact is when it comes to observing what's going on both inside and outside your business, both inside and outside your team, he said the fact is the greatest consistent damage to businesses and their owners is the result not of poor management technique, but of the failure, sometimes willful, to confront reality. That's what observation is about, is confronting reality. He goes on to say to confront reality is to recognize the world as it is, not as you wish it to be, and have the courage to do what must be done, not what you'd like to do. So it first starts out with observation. What we want to do, the Marines have a concept in their combat hunter program called left of bang. Left of bang is when the IED goes off. Okay, that's when the sniper rounds come in. Right of bang is what you start doing afterwards. You start rolling in the corpsman. You start getting in medevacs. You start returning fire. But as a business owner and a kingdom business leader, as much as possible, we want to observe and stay left of bang. Be aware of what's going on around us and make decisions prior to a crisis. So then it passes through our orientation. We'll come back to. Then we make a decision. How many of you guys in here think that really believe here that How many of you guys in here think that you're analytical decision makers? Can I see your hands? Okay. How many of you think you're intuitive decision makers? How many of you think this is a question designed to humiliate you in public, regardless of your answer here? Here's the thing. We make either analytical or we make intuitive decisions. But the fact is, the reality is, guys, over 90% of the decisions we make are intuitive. And even when we're making an, quote, analytical decision, it's influenced by intuition. Wade, my business partner up here, when he's talking about business owners, he quotes the concept. And who was the guy that did the study, Wade, about the brain injury when the emotion piece was gone?
Oh, yes, it was a brain surgeon, and his name escapes me at the second because he put me on the spot.
Yeah, a brain surgeon, and they actually studied when the emotional part of the brain was damaged. Then when they would train these guys that were trying to recover and kind of go into a mock-up grocery store and that came, they were incapable of making a decision. So it's very funny. The Bible tells us in Jeremiah the heart is deceitfully wicked. And so our biases in making decisions, especially intuitive, are very strong. The next thing Antonio Damasio. All right, thank you. So the next one here is we act. We execute. And so in combat, or even on a football team, a basketball court, and in business, the faster you can make this cycle against your opponent, the greater your opportunity to win. Now, many times in business, and competition in business is about killing the enemy, killing your competitors and all that. What it is about is staying inside the expectation loop of your clients. If you can move faster than their expectations, that's when you have the opportunity to win. Patton said a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. So Marines have a bias for action. So here's what I want to come back to. Orientation, Boyd said, is the most important part. And it made up of several things. The first one is genetic heritage. We can't do a lot about that. John Wayne, in the greatest movie ever, The Sands of Iwo Jima, said, life's tough. It's especially tough if you're stupid. And Ron White, the comedian, said, you can't fix stupid. And so we have certain skills and abilities we're born with. Even though I built towers to 2,000 feet in the air and built with steel and did that successfully and actually started out in the business working on them myself, my wife will not let me do anything inside the house. I'm not good with stuff that's soft, like sheetrock and wood and stuff like that. I actually make Tim the Toolman Taylor look competent inside here. But the point I want to make is we all are wired. If any of you guys have ever done anything like strengths finders and those type things, you can find a lot of things that you've inherited genetically. The next one there, hang on, let me back up here. Okay. Let me see, did any of those, when we slid them over, did they get out of order, you think? Okay, we'll keep track. We'll improvise, adapt, and overcome. So let me go back to this. And then you've got new information. Usually after you have new information, hopefully tonight, after you've learned this, your orientation will be different than when you came in here. Then the next one that you'll see is previous experience. Now that can be good or bad. But we make decisions based on our previous experience. And the French have a word for that sometimes that they use there called déformation professionnelle, which means professional illness. And it means so many times if we've seen something time and time and time again and aren't taking into account the fact that the structure's changed, then previous experience can be a double-edged sword. Then the next one there that we see is how we analyze or how we synthesize. It's one thing to take any particular object and go to it like this organ here, and go to it and then start analyzing all the pieces of this thing, okay? And looking and say it's got so many white keys, we quantify so many black keys, it's got XYZ buttons, etc. That's one skill set. The skill set that's required in this new environment is the ability to synthesize. If you can picture that organ laying amongst a bunch of junk up here, but every piece of that organ laying up here, and then the ability to look and say, okay, that's the white key that goes here, that's the black key that goes there, that's the stand, and pulling those out, that is the ability to synthesize, and that's what leaders have to do in today's marketplace. And then finally down there, the cultural traditions. And here's where you as a leader can have the greatest impact in building a high-performance culture that's based on trust. And that's what the Marines do. They build a culture that's based on trust, that's able to improvise, adapt, and overcome this VUCA that you see out in the marketplace. So here's what Marcus Buckingham did, and this was part of the Street Finders. They studied over 200,000 employees in companies, and here's what they found. 55%, or let me back up here, only 26% of employees are engaged. I mean, they're there to win. I mean, they are there to do the job, earn their keep, they're excited about what they do, etc. 55% are not engaged. They're waiting for the clock, and they're watching it, okay? And then you've got 19% that are mobile and hostile. And so if your team makeup looks like this on the outside, if you've got this kind of internal friction, how can you possibly have the fighting power to take on the friction that's out there in the marketplace? So creating that type of culture is extremely important. Command and control is the means by which a leader recognizes what needs to be executed and sees to it that the appropriate actions are taken. No single activity is more important. And here's what the Marines say, when the simple is difficult and the difficult is impossible, we have friction. And so friction can be mental, i.e. I'm having a hard time making decisions, or it can be physical, i.e. there's a truck blocking the road or there's a hurricane going on that my company can't make deliveries. He also talks about that an organization has internal friction and external. Of the two, which do you think is more dangerous? Internal friction is much, much more dangerous. So he says that what the Marines say, to best cope with uncertainty, disorder, and fluidity, your command and control must be decentralized. Tell me your name again. We were talking about the simulator. Mark was talking about his business and growing a business and that type of thing. And we were talking about the fact that when we first engage business owners in what we do, they're usually, if something happened to the business owner, if he assumed room temperature, nobody'd know where the key to the head was, because the leadership is so centralized. And so you cannot be a leader and teach leadership by having a centralized model. So it's about making it decentralized. So traditional command and control looks like this. This is what you see out in most of the Fortune 500 companies. A leader commands his people, and then a leader tries to control his people. The Marines have a little different view there. The Marine Leadership Guide says this: it's a delusion to think we can be in control. You can't. So a model that's able to adapt to that marketplace looks like this. It's where a leader influences the action And then he trusts his people enough to accept their feedback. And so within that concept, this requires trust. Here's what the Marines say. The aim is not to increase our capacity. It's not more procedures. It's not clamping down harder. It's not cracking the whip harder. It's not to increase our capacity to perform command and control. It is not more command and control that we're after. Instead, we seek to increase the amount of, or decrease the amount of command and control that we need. Stephen Covey said this when I mentioned trust. He said, trust equals character plus competence. Now, I may trust you, I may trust you with anything. I'd trust Wade to babysit my grandkids. He ain't doing LASIK surgery on me because I don't trust his competence in that area. So trust is made up of both of those, and the Bible gives us that exact same model in Psalm 78:72. For every kingdom business leader in here, this needs to be your life verse. And it said, and David shepherded them with integrity of heart, that's character, and with skillful hands he led them. So it takes both to get it done. Here's what a simple thing that Covey asked. He said, do you trust your boss? Now, I want you to think about that question just for a moment, your boss, if you have one. And I want you to ask this question, the hard question, if you are a boss, how would your people answer this? Because he said the answer is more predictive of team performance than any other question, this concept of trust. Here's how it looks. When you have an organization that trust is down, then guess what? Speed is down. How many of y'all have been involved in companies or work there now? You don't have to raise your hand if your boss is sitting in the room here. But how many of y'all have been in companies that you CC 14,000 people to make sure you've covered your behind when you send emails? You guys know what I'm talking about? Been in that environment? That slows it down, that lack of trust. And when the speed of a company goes down, then the cost goes up. When you have trust up, then speed goes up and cost goes down. Guys, there should not be a kingdom business leader out there in the marketplace. And sadly, there are some who call themselves that. I've run into them out there. But there should not be one that names the name of Christ that their people would not trust. That should be an issue that's not on the table at all. Cohesion is the bonds of trust within a group, and it's a lubricant which reduces internal friction and fear while creating greater opportunities to overcome external friction. Here's the thing. The human brain actually codes social recognition. That's why it's important, and you guys are great at this here at Gateway, and I was honored as a visitor to come here today, are great at meeting people, making them feel welcome, etc., because the human brain codes that social recognition, support, and attachment is physical safety. Isn't that something? The cohesion not only increases the overcoming of fear that we call courage, it actually reduces fear. And the opposite of fear is love. The Bible tells us that. Colonel Ardent Dupac said this. He said, 4 brave men who do not know each other will dare not attack a lion. 4 less brave, but knowing each other well, sure of their reliability and consequently of mutual aid, will attack resolutely. So in this, how this all comes together, we showed you the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. When you have a culture of trust or a culture of distrust, when you have high internal friction, your OODA loops are a lot larger. They take a lot longer to cycle. Any organization only has 2 forms of energy. It's either eaten up with internal friction or it manifests itself externally as fighting power, the ability to attack and go after the marketplace. When you have a high trust culture, you reduce that OODA loop and transition that into fighting power. So Simon Sinek, in another book I challenge you guys to read called Leaders Eat Last, that's written about the United States Marine Corps. In the United States Marine Corps, you eat according to rank. The higher your rank, the later you eat. All of your men are taken care of in front of you. That's your charge as a leader. So he asked this question, what fuels your team? What drug is your team on? Are they on cortisol? He asked that question. Cortisol's the worry drug. It's the fear drug. It's am I going to lose my job? What's going on here? All the negative, sinful politics that go on. Is it the dopamine that's my personal high when I personally achieve? Or is it oxytocin, which they call the love drug? And so that can't be dismissed. In fact, here is a shot from 2005. This is Major General Jim Williams when we were together in Camp Blue Diamond. How many of you guys have seen the movie Twins? Have y'all seen that? What you don't know is that's loosely based on the life of Jim and me. But anyway, in this great guy lives here in Dallas, a believer in Christ, 4 master's degrees. This guy was working as a reservist and was called up when the shooting started in 2001 and served our country and became the commanding general of the 4th Marine Division. But as this commanding general of the 4th Marine Division, he still signed all of his official United States emails with this epithet. It's all about love. So what was he talking about? He was talking about this. Dr. Jonathan Shea, in a study on cohesion in the United States Marine Corps, said the result of creating well-trained, well-led, cohesive units is love. Let me ask you this, guys. As much as it within your power, in your organization, is love a factor of what you do? And when I talk about love, I'm not talking what I see some of these business owners that want everybody to love them. That's not love, that's narcissism. Sorry. There's no accountability because they're afraid if I hold Maud accountable, she might leave there. So I'm going to love her and let her just track on in mediocrity. I'm not talking about that. That's not true love. But is love a force multiplier within your organization? John 15:3 says, greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. And so as believers in Christ, we must have this. This is the sign, this is the Chinese sign right now or the symbol for crisis. But if you look at it, it's made up of 2 components. The first component or the first symbol there stands for danger. And we live in dangerous times. I mean, guys, we're riding a good wave right now. This country's so far in debt, it's not funny. And as old Billy Sunday used to say, there's payday someday. Nobody wants to talk about that. I was at a meeting today, and they had the guy from the World Affairs Council was up there jaw-jacking and all that, and they were answering all these questions about Trump's trade policy and all that. And I asked him, I said, well, let me ask this question, sir. I said, what do our all the countries internationally, what's their concern level about our debt as a nation? And I said, secondly, I'd like to know how you think this is going to ultimately play out. And he said, Mr. Blanton, I'm going to punt that question. Wouldn't even answer the question. So we live in a time of danger. It is VUCA. It is high-speed, high-stress chaos. But as believers in Christ, and if you're a leader, there's never been a greater time to be alive. As the world grows darker and darker, and people go less and less to churches, you have the ability to be the face of Christ in the marketplace and lead with both character and confidence. You can show the love of Christ and have the character, but if you're inconfident, people are going to look at that and say, yeah, he's a good guy, but they're not going to have the kind of trust that you need to succeed. So I'm going to wrap it up here and then open up for Q&A, but I want to leave you here with a thought and a saying that we took from the French Foreign Legion that goes like this: if in the heat of the battle I stumble, push me. If in the heat of the battle I fall, pick me up. But if in the heat of the battle I retreat, shoot me. My offices are located just across the highway here, guys. And as you start down this road as a kingdom business leader and you have the opportunity to influence the world with character and competence for Christ, and you take the challenge to become the very best at what you do, if in the heat of the battle you stumble, if you call me, I will push you. If in the heat of the battle you fall, if you call me, I promise you, I will help you up. But if I ever hear through the grapevine that in the heat of the battle you retreat, I promise you, I will personally shoot you. Thank y'all very much. All right.